my system completely crashed as we were switching around and talking about the development that took place. And I think we were. So it said the Israeli uh, Minister of Justice uh, attacked the Palestinian, calling them snakes, and these are the settlers who actually set fire on Bureen's land. And this is a Palestinian grandmother where her kid, they were removed from their home in Sheikh Jarrah. So this is what we are experiencing as we speak. Palestinians are experiencing this inside the occupied territories inside Jerusalem, Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in particular. And this is actually, again, to mention about Ben Gurion's uncensored diary, that this has been a long policy of ethnic cleansing, of committing genocide against the Palestinians, and trying to force them to out of historical Palestine. I need always to remind people that what Palestinians are experiencing is that they are experiencing a settler colonial project. It's not a miscommunication. It's not a misunderstanding. It is not a difference of opinion on one thing or the other. It is a settler colonial project. Settler colonialism engages in genocide of the indigenous population, and the remaining population is often transferred and sent to reservations, pushed into the most undesirable land, moved across the borders into different countries. So that's settler colonialism. Settler colonialism wants maximum land with no indigenous population on the land. So that's what the Palestinians are facing. So people who think that we could just get together over an interfaith hummus and falafel plate, or increasingly Israel claiming kunafe and all types of Palestinian dishes, za'atar and so on, that we're able to sit down and we would resolve a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding when we have settler colonialism. You ask the indigenous Native Americans in the U.S., they don't have a misunderstanding of settler colonialism. They understand exactly what settler colonialism is about. So there's often this disingenuous aspect to some individuals, especially within the liberal landscape. Increasingly, some Zionist Muslims that have embraced this, Zionist Arabs, that use all types of what I consider be smart aleck Johnny come lately to rationalize their engagement with settler colonialism. And I would have to say that has been a door that people are trying to use religious text to rationalize engagement with settler colonialism. And so we need to understand what settler colonialism is. Genocide and transfer are constitutive element of it, as well as racism, and then deploying religious rationalization. We understand in settler colonialism and colonialism in general the notion of civilizing the barbarians, the white man burden, not to always emphasize that the white man on a global level has been the burden on the world. So we have to understand the circumstances that the Palestinians are going through. And Ben Gurion points to this from at least the early period of the development of Israel, where this idea of pushing the indigenous population, pushing the Palestinians out in order to arrive at a maximum land with minimum Palestinian population. So Jerusalem itself and the West Bank has been facing systematic emptying, systematic strangulations of the population to such an extent that we actually are still experiencing the unfolding Nakba. So In Jerusalem, today's settlements and settlers are taking house by house, neighborhood by neighborhood, in order to try to strangle the Palestinians and not to allow the Palestinians to have their normal patterns of development and existence. Since 1993, the Oslo Agreement, the signing of the Oslo Agreement, the West Bank had approximately between 110 to 140,000, maybe 160, depending on which data do you use, in 1993. Today, in the West Bank, there's approximately 650,000 settlers. So let me repeat. From 1993, when the Palestinians signed a peace treaty with the PLO to reach into a two-state solution, there were approximately, again, between 140 to 160,000 settlers. Today, in the West Bank, there is 650,000 settlers. More importantly, in relations to Jerusalem, Israel have expanded the boundaries, the municipal boundaries of Jerusalem, in order to maintain a Zionist demographic superiority over the Palestinians. So, what is called today Israeli or Jewish neighborhood, and again, I use the term Jewish in here in relation to Zionist Jewish because we have many Jewish allies, progressive allies, Jews that are saying what is taking place is wrong. But in here, in relations to Jerusalem, the definition of Jewish neighborhoods is to separate those from Arab neighborhoods. And these neighborhoods are, in essence, settlements that have been built illegally since 1967. And the boundaries of Jerusalem have been expanded to constantly maintain what is called demographic superiority. Uh, any country that uses demography to demarcate between different parts of the population is a racist country, using racism, using a notion of superior, inferior, using demarcation based on ethnicity, religion, language, racial features, and so on, as a way to create this demarcation. So when we talk about Greater Jerusalem today, we're talking about lands that were taken from Palestinian villages and neighborhoods. We're talking about areas that were incorporated and emptied of Palestinian population, and settlements were built in there, and Zionist settlers came in, were given access by the Israeli government. They're given tax breaks to live in settlements. They're given Israeli army protection on a continuous basis at the expense of the Palestinians. More insidious also that often in many parts of the West Bank, the settlements are built over hilltops while Palestinians are kept at least or where they are in the valley. And in some places across the West Bank, the sewage from the settlements sewer system is opened on Palestinian lands. So not only that you get the foulness of settlements and the foulness of settler colonialism, but literally you get actually the foulness of the sewage dumped on Palestinian fields and the Palestinian neighborhoods in such a way that it makes sometimes life such an extreme conditions for the Palestinian. More importantly, and more importantly, is also that water resources, Palestinian water resources, are actually stolen by Israel and the settlers, because not only that you have the wall that has been the apartheid wall, but the wall actually made sure to keep much of the access to the aquifers and the wells on the western side of the wall, and Palestinians are not even allowed to dig in their own to dig their own water wells. Uh, and the settlers often used almost 20 to sometimes 40 times as much water as the Palestinians. Now, here's the kicker for us to actually think about: that Palestinian water is stolen from them, and then they have to buy their water from the Israeli water company that actually steals their water. Now, just imagine, just yourself, somebody actually, stealing your jacket and your purse, and possibly some other items from you, and then have the audacity to actually come to your house and force you to buy what belongs to you, because the Palestinians can't actually access their own water. They're subject to Israeli military regulations. So they steal Palestinian water, and then their Palestinians are forced to buy the water from the Israeli water company as such. So that's really another layer when the Human Rights Watch comes into the conclusion that we're dealing with an apartheid. I'm saying, well, welcome, thank you. Finally, you actually come on board, because we've been saying apartheid at least from the early 80s. One has to give credit to President Carter when his book Peace Not Apartheid mentioned even it was only a small paragraph, he mentioned apartheid then. So the term apartheid has been in circulation, but it is good that we have Human Rights Watch actually coming with a full report that puts the apartheid understanding in its right context, which looks and defines how the Palestinians and the Jewish population are treated completely differently. There are regulations in 48. Palestinian citizens are treated differently in terms of an apartheid structure, but also Palestinians in the West Bank are subject to military occupation, military regulations that actually dictate almost every aspect of their normal life. So much so that there's apartheid at the level of the car license plate. So Palestinian license plates that are under occupation have a different license plate, and then Israeli settlers and Israeli population have their different license plate, and then the roads have a religious identity. Now you have the whole road system in the West Bank that the road has a religious identity. There are Jewish Zionist roads only. Arabs are not allowed to drive in these roads. Again, all the footprint of these roads in the West Bank are lands that were confiscated from the Palestinians. So speak about not only that you have a military occupation, but also that the land itself was taken from the Palestinians, and the destruction to the environment. I'm still waiting for considerable segment of the environmental movement here in the U.S. to utter a peep about what Israel's violations, destruction of the environment, pollution, all that. All what you hear is often is how Israel have actually perfected a particular dripping system and so on, and you have what you call literally the cleanup job, the crew that actually polishes apartheid, including some in the environmental movement who are quick to praise X, Y, and Z, but not realize that the structure settler colonialism in Palestine have destroyed the Palestinian environment, have completely reshaped the topography, have introduced a particular type. Just think about the settlements, which are often attempts to produce a lifestyle that might be akin to maybe living in upstate New York or in different parts of the U.S. where you have plenty of water and river system, and you produce that same lifestyle with swimming pool, with green lawns that are irrigated 24/7, and so on. That is just not an environmentally conscious structure that will be commensurate with the land and the topography, the water table, and so on. But you don't find anybody actually speaking and understanding what has been brought about in relations to the destruction visited to Palestine on the environmental front. So what we're facing today in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood is that Israeli settlers, emboldened by the Israeli government, that has embraced all the right-wing part of the Israeli political spectrum, including the Kahana supporters, meaning those who were Mer Kahana supporters to the extreme right, which the United States actually declared them to have them as a terrorist organization. they are right now within the Knesset and participate in the political process within Israel, and this has emboldened them to continue to encroach and take one neighborhood at a time and one house at a time, to such an extent that to continue to ethnically cleanse and to limit Palestinians' normative patterns of growth, of development, of increase over in their own land and in their own property. And I think we need to be very clear to speak to our local leadership, to speak to the political leadership, that the time for actually speaking on Palestine is today. We have to challenge the progressive accept on Palestine, that people will actually speak on progressive politics in relations to protection of Mars and the moon, but they can't utter a word in protection of Palestine while using using American weapon, U.S. aid to facilitate the oppression of the Palestinians. So that has to be challenged, right? And I don't care whether you're tall, short, long, whatever it is. If you actually want to be a person that speaks of justice, then you have to be, justice is indivisible. Justice in here or justice across the world, you have to have a consistent standard on how you apply it. And the time for us to actually ask the political leadership at the local level, to ask the congressional leadership in here in the Bay Area as well as nationally, to begin to actually speak about cutting aid to Israel, speak about supporting the BDS movement, speak about taking Israel to task for its apartheid. Remember that we have actually a convention on the crime of apartheid adopted in the United Nations. So we're not speaking about some idea that does not have a full articulation within the international community. It does. We have rallied to counter South Africa's apartheid regime, rightly so, and the time to counter Israeli apartheid structure and the continued settler colonialism in Palestine is today. I can't really overemphasize the need for us to rally the support and to speak out on this at this particular time. And lastly, when I'm speaking about Palestine, because again, it's a cause that I'm constantly following and constantly engaged, by no means I don't understand and relate to causes, other causes, whether our Black community here in the United States that continues to face the oppression, continues to face human rights and civil rights violation, the indigenous population, speak of the Latino immigrants at the border and what circumstances and the separation that has been visited upon them with mothers and kids being ripped from the hands of their mother, put in cages. I understand the situation in Kashmir with our Kashmiri brothers and sisters, been under massive Indian military lockdown lasting months, interrupting their communication, their internet, and then the Muslims in India facing the ravages of the Hindutva and Narendra Modi, who's actually is an alliance with Israel as well. Muslims in China, in Uyghur, Myanmar, and Syria, Iraq. So I'm very familiar with all and constantly express solidarity and engagement on those fronts. But again, in here, Palestine is facing a settler colonial project that has been unfolding since the British arrived on the scene with the Balfour Declaration and the Sykes-Picot Agreement between the British and the French. So I do have a big beef with the British, and I think we should not at any time excuse them. And maybe some people like to watch the British royal family and entertain themselves with what you call, every once in a while they'll have a wedding and they get everybody captivated. But let me be sure, every time you look at any conflict in the world, the British hands are directly involved in there. Whether you think about the poverty and the complete disorientation that we see in India, Great Britain took close to $15 trillion out of India. So actually structurally underdeveloped India. Now they'll say, oh, we built you a school. Oh, thanks a lot, right? You cause poverty, structural poverty over generations. And the only thing is that we brought you or built you an educational system which actually is Eurocentrically built, which actually creates self-hate for the individual, that you don't really appreciate the history, culture, tradition, values of your own society. And in essence, you begin to be actually self internally colonized. As Stephen Biko said, the most dangerous weapons in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. But in here, what we have in colonization, the British and the others, is that they implemented an educational system that makes you actually internally colonized, where you always actually see yourself in a structure of incapacity, of actually a whole series of negations. And the only way for affirming yourself is you get in contact with what you call the real human, which is Eurocentricity, the European, the white supremacist, and so on. So we need to understand this. So when I speak about Palestine, I am not disconnecting from the historical trajectory and the circumstances across the world. Rather, I see it as part of the connectivity and part of a continuum, that my specificity in relations to Palestine is not disconnected from the historical and contemporary struggles that face many communities across the world. I know that my talk today is heavily political because of what transpired in Palestine, but also I don't see that examining the Quran should be completely disconnected from examining the injustice. Again, that God commands to justice, that God is just, and therefore I don't see any discrepancy between speaking of the political in relations to examining and visitation of the Quran, especially we're speaking about Al-Aqsa and what it has been facing in the past few days, and at least past few days, but it's been ongoing since the Nakba. So if you have any questions, by all means on the comments. If you have any comment, I know that Samina Osman said, and throw trash on the Palestinians below. Yes, that takes place in Al Khalil. If you go to Al Khalil, you'll find some of the most really vicious, thuggish, completely disrespect for the Palestinians. These are some of the harshest settlers that often throw garbage on the Palestinians. They often shoot at their houses. They shoot at the water tanks on a regular basis. So this is what the Palestinians face on a regular basis. And the key for us here in the United States is that we are funding this atrocity that is unfolding. Right? We are giving Israel close to 3.4, 3.5 billion dollars, but you have to add to it all of the other donations that comes. There's the Friends of Israeli Defense Force. So actually, you could actually have a tax deduction for contributing to actually funding the Israeli Defense Force. In here, it's just unimaginable the things that goes under the rubric of extending support for Israel on a regular basis. So we need to actually raise our voices and to bring an end to it, inshallah. So if you have any questions, by all means, you could enter it on the chat. And if you want to also call, you could actually call and have a conversation. It's up to you. I just wanted to express my really visceral reaction to what occurred today in Al-Aqsa Mosque, and to see people being attacked while they're in fasting, as well as trying to finish their Taraweeh. We're here in the United States. We're comfortable in our daily fasting and our daily practices in Ramadan, and this is not what the Palestinians are experiencing at this time. So, Jazakumullah khair if you don't have any questions, and hopefully we'll have another encounter tomorrow. We'll visit some of the verses of the Quran, inshallah, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept your fasting, your dua, your prayers, your qiyam, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring good health and cure to all of those who are suffering from COVID. and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well to have mercy and to have rahmah on all those who passed as a result of COVID or as a result of natural causes, and give their families patience as they heal and confront the pain of separation of their loved one. So, Jazakumullah khair. Went a little bit over time, but Alhamdulillah, I'll see you tomorrow, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.